Years ago, I was driving home from college for Christmas break in my beat-up old Honda Civic. It was a rainy day in the mountains on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. The car actually had an 8-track player built in. I had a cartridge-shaped adapter that I could insert a cassette tape into this so I could listen to music. I'm a bit sleepy but jamming to my tunes when all of a sudden I hear this garbled sound coming from the speakers. I look down and see that the cassette is unspooling. I pull up the cassette and come up with a fistful loose tape which I fixate on for a second. When I look up, I am all the way in the breakdown lane. I jerk the wheel to the left. Big mistake. Wet road causes oversteer and I am now careening sideways off the highway. I hit the embankment and my car starts flipping over and over and over 5 times. It all happens in what seems like slow motion. Every roll, all I can think of is, I'm going to die. I'm going to die. And then it's over. My car is upright, sitting in the grass perpendicular to the turnpike. Except for some soreness, I'm physically okay. All of the side windows have shattered because the roof has crumpled about 3 inches. I crawl out, still in shock. All of my possessions are scattered in a 300-yard swath on the embankment behind me. There is an overpass 300 yards in front of me. Soon people are pulling over and it turns out that there was a state trooper hiding in a speed trap just past the bridge. I am detached and emotionless and everything seems to be happening to someone else. Eventually a wrecker shows up and I hitch a ride with my totaled car to a rural gas station where my car was deposited into a small salvage yard. I reach my father who comes to get me but is 2 hours away. I start emptying what is left of my stuff from the car when I notice the wreck next to me. It is a tan Accord hatchback similar to my car. The front driver's side is caved in from the hood to the back of the driver's seat where there is a rusty stain. The car is still packed with clothing and other personal items. That's when it hit me. If there had been any obstruction, anything besides soft grass in my path, I would be just as dead as the former owner was. The absolutely most terrifying thing had nothing to do with the paranormal. I grew up in the countryside among the woods and acres. One summer night a few years ago, I was on the phone with a friend and I decided to take a nightly stroll, as I did at least 3 to 4 times a week. She, the friend, was on a train somewhere and at one point she went through a tunnel and the connection was lost. I decided to sit down on the road, get my Crocs, and don't judge, I only wear them on these walks, okay? They were a gift. Take the Crocs off and just sit there and wait for her call back. The small road was running between 2 small fields, which both bordered to the forest. As I was sitting there, I noticed something on the borderline of the field and the forest to my right. I didn't hear a thing, and it was too dark for me to see anything at all. I knew it was there though. I knew it was watching me. And then it screamed. People laugh at me when I describe the scream, but I swear it sounded as a mixture of a human, a very large bird, and a big cat. Think of a lion, being tied up and whipped. I realized I was running and had managed to put my Crocs in the sprint. I've never been running so fast in my life. I was so incredibly scared and I honestly thought I was going to die. I could hear it running after me, screaming again and again and again. Eventually, I just throw myself in behind a bush to hide. It didn't follow me anymore, but based on the screaming, which continued for like 15 minutes, it was close, but not moving. When it had been quiet for about 10 minutes, I ran home. I texted my friend telling her what happened, and then my mom came downstairs and asked me what had happened, as she had woken up by me slamming the door. I told her what happened and she laughed. "Dear, that was a roe deer. They sound like that. If you had been running towards it, it would probably have ran away instead. I was stunned. I had been living in that place for 18 years, had seen road deers pretty much daily for a major part of the year, but it dawned on me that I had never actually heard one before. I still hear them sometimes when I visit my parents. Can never really get comfortable with the bark either. When Hubby deployed to Iraq, in our guts we all knew he wouldn't come home. Everyone did. Me, my husband, the kids, other family members, friends, etc. No explanation, just something all of us felt the moment he received orders. Wasn't a matter of if, but when it would happen. None of us talked about it, not until afterwards, and it was really eerie how all of us had the exact same gut feeling. Probably for fear, by actually saying it would happen sooner. So we spent 15 to 16 months dreading that moment. Hubby used to call and or get online and talk to me every day, even if it meant waiting in line 2 to 3 hours. We never said what we were thinking, that this was probably the last time we would speak, but we made sure that each of us never left anything else unsaid, which ironically brought us closer together then, at that time. 17 years of marriage had not. His battalion did convoy security. We had worked out codes ahead of time for the various bases in Iraq, so he would call or instant message me and tell me he was going out for a few days to Candyland or something, and I would know from maps that meant he was heading to Baghdad, etc., and I knew what fobs he would be stopping at along the way. When something bad happened, the battalion would go on blackout, which meant no phone calls. Internet was blocked, etc., until family members could be notified. So when I wouldn't hear from him in 24 hours, I usually knew something was up. I was heavily involved in the family support group and was one of the people who battalion would contact to call other families to let them know X happened, but your soldier was okay. So Hubby goes out on a mission to an area that had recently had a lot of IED attacks. I don't hear from him, so of course I got worried. 24 hours go by, but I haven't received the call from battalion to start letting certain families know their soldier is okay. Usually we get that call within 24 hours, after the injured or killed service member's family has been notified in person. We lost 2 guys the first 3 weeks of their deployment. They had not put a strict blackout in place. A soldier called his family and told them what happened. Somehow the news found out, and it was on the news locally before the killed family members had been notified. Battalion made sure that never happened again. I started getting really concerned the longer my phone didn't ring. I contacted a couple other family support members to see if they had gotten a call from the battalion yet, but only got voicemails, which really scared me. Were they dodging my calls knowing why I was calling? Did they know something I didn't? When we would get the call from the battalion, we had a list of people to call. If one of them was the victim, we would be informed to not call them, so it was not difficult to figure out. And despite being involved in this process, another support member was required to call me to let me know my family member was okay. Then I hear a car pull up and stop in our alley right outside my bedroom window. I look out and it's a government vehicle. I can tell it was government plates, with at least 2 people in the car, one of which appeared to be in uniform. I see the passenger pull out a clipboard and folder and start looking at it while talking to the driver. My heart sank. We are a small town. There is only one reason such a vehicle will be parked outside my home. I lost it. My 2 oldest kids, 16 and 15, were home, and I debated calling them down to prepare them. The vehicle didn't move. The people didn't get out. It felt like eternity, but in reality it was probably no more than 5 minutes. And then they drove away. I still, 9 years later, have no idea who they were, why they were stopped there. Nothing. I have never been as scared as I was in those moments. Eventually we did get the call to start contacting families. A soldier had been injured, but there was a longer than usual delay contacting family members due to them traveling at the time. My husband did make it home from the deployment, although I admit, watching his plane land, I had a few moments of fear that it would crash. I was 12 years old. My next door neighbor's son was 19, and he was sort of damaged, I guess you could say. Always in trouble with the police, stealing cars, heavily drinking, always fighting. But he was like an older brother to me, even after he stole 3 of my bikes to sell them for drugs. Anyway, one morning I went over to his house around 8 a.m. to play Nintendo. Yes, this was a while ago. His girlfriend had spent the night and they ended up getting into an argument. Nothing new. I was used to seeing them argue. Anyway, after a while it got out of hand and he punched her, dragged her across 2 rooms and into the living room where I was playing Nintendo. He pulled out a knife and held it to her throat and cut her when he did it, non-intentionally, at least at this point. My grandmother heard the scream because the houses connect and the walls are thin, and called the cops. A standoff ended up happening. He dragged her around the house for a good 2 hours with that knife in his hand, eventually threatening to kill everyone in the house, which registered to me as his girlfriend and myself. They eventually got him to open the door and talk through the screen door, or so they claimed. And second that wooden door opened, he was rushed by 5 cops in body armor and a shield. Scariest morning of my life. I was sitting in my car parked outside the local cigar shop, which is bordering on the bad part of town, while my mom was buying some cigars for family and friends to celebrate the 4th of July. I look to my side and see someone park their van 2 spots over, and not 20 seconds after they parked, before the driver had even gotten out, the other car zips through the parking lot and slams into the back of the van. It must have been doing at least 30 miles per hour when it hit the van. Immediately, the driver of the van rushed out of his car and started banging on the windows of the guy who hit him and trying to tear off the locked door, all the while screaming and cursing and barking like a madman, and his friend hops out of the van and joins in on trying to remove this guy from the vehicle. It is worth mentioning that these guys are on the small side. Soon after, the guy finally gets out of his car and he is massive, 300 plus pounds and at least 6'3", and both parties get right into each other's faces until the big guy pushes one of the little guys, which causes the two to start throwing punches. This is all happening in a busy parking lot, mind you, so people are having to drive around them, and they are starting to draw plenty of attention. So they tussle for a bit until the big guy hits one of the little guys hard, absolutely wrecking him, which causes him to fall back while his friend goes Karate Kid on the big guy. All of a sudden, the guy who got wrecked whips out a gun and starts waving it around, pointing it sideways at the big guy gangster movie style. At this point, I am in the car less than 30 feet away and I peel out like a bat out of hell and park at a safe distance, frantically calling my mom to make sure she is okay, but I cannot reach her. Finally, on the 3rd try, she answers and she says she is okay and on lockdown in the cigar shop, but it doesn't end there. The 2 guys keep advancing, gun in hand, on the big guy, taking their little fiasco onto the road, and they're doing this whole lion encircling its prey thing in the middle of an 8-lane highway, completely blocking traffic. All of a sudden, about 8 police cars surround them in the street. I'm talking screeching stop and immediately taking cover behind the open doors with various types of guns drawn and aimed, and a canine attack dogs being held back. Probably the most badass thing I've ever seen. I remember the exact moment when you could see them shit themselves as they were totally fucked. Still cannot believe I witnessed that up close and personal. While I was probably 20 or 21 years old, about the age to know better, I was supposed to meet a friend at the local bus terminal to go for a pint. My friend never showed up. This left me mildly disgruntled and apparently quite vulnerable as well. A black BMW pulled up out front the terminal and a middle-aged gentleman in a rather expensive-looking suit got out, blonde curly hair flowing in the breeze. This gentleman says, "Hey, is there a place to get coffee in the terminal?" I said, "Nah, but there's a great cafe down the street." The gentleman says, "Are you looking for any part-time employment?" I explained that I was currently employed, but some part-time work could be possible. Gentleman then tells me to jump in his car and we'd grab coffee and talk about the job. We drive in town for a few minutes and then I realized that we were leaving the city. I asked this complete stranger, "Hey, where are you taking me?" And he says, "Oh, the job is in the other town over, which is where I live, so we'll just go to my house and have a beer and talk about the job there." This statement apparently doesn't seem strange to me at all, so I ask, "What is the job exactly?" After I've left town with this stranger, he says, "Well, I'm a tour guide for European tourists in the area. We do bike and hiking tours, You'd be doing something like that." Seems okay to me. At this point, he offers me a cigar. I accept and begin smoking the most expensive cigar I have ever wrapped my lips around. We get to this home, which is a monster of a house in a nearby resort town. He has all sorts of crazy taxidermy animals, including a small alligator on his coffee table. He offers me a beer which was from a local craft brewery. Quite a tasty brew if I can recall. He starts telling me all of these things that I would be doing as a tour guide, including sensual massages. At this point he says to me, "Okay, so you can get naked now and I'll show you how it's done, and then I'll get naked and you can do it to me." I said, "F that. Here's what's really gonna happen. You're gonna give me the money to hop on a bus home, or I'm gonna knock you out and take your car home." He apologized for the miscommunication and gave money for a ride home. I once had a really freaky string of hallucinations while under the effects of sleep paralysis. First was the visual hallucinations. I'm almost certain my eyes were open, but everything was pure, shining white. I looked around in every direction my eyes couldn't see. Then an image started to fade in. I have no idea what it was, but it almost looked like a polished conch shell, elongated and more colorful. It was split into segments which rotated at different speeds and in different directions around a wobbling and distorted axis. It looked like a series of gears spinning and rotating and collapsing in on themselves. The conch thing had a very mechanical look too, but the way it was moving made no sense. The thing gave me very uneasy feeling. It's how I imagine I'd feel laying my eyes on alien technology, thousands of years more advanced than what humans have. Surprise, confusion, astonishment, and a consuming fear of the unknown. Shortly after, I started experiencing the tactile hallucinations. Before I could begin to grasp what my eyes were seeing, I felt something poke my wrist, like a finger. I couldn't move or respond. Then it poked my wrist again, harder. Then a third time, but this time the pressure didn't release. It pressed harder and harder until it pressed entirely through my skin and hit the bones of my forearm. At that moment, my entire skeleton felt as though it was twisting and turning, like the bones in my arms and legs were bending and contorting. Accompanying this sensation was not pain, but a bit of panic and an intense nails on a chalkboard discomfort. And before the bone twisting ran its course, I experienced an auditory hallucination that rattled me like no other nightmare ever has. It was like a blast of noise. That's the best way to describe it. Not a boom or a bang, but as though, for just an instant, 1,000 radios all playing different channels switched on in my head. An unintelligible blast, but it felt like something spoke to me. The blast sounded like a word from some otherworldly being. I woke right the hell up after that and I ski fucking daddled my ass out of my room and out of my house at 3 in the morning. This was, by a wide margin, the most frightening experience I've ever had in my life. I look back and recognize that I was just experiencing some sleep paralysis and some weird hallucinations. No danger and nothing to be afraid of, but I was like 15 years old and sleeping with the lights on for months after that.